Thank you, Oliver. Thank you for that introduction and for the opportunity to be here today and share with you my views on retail and, more importantly, its direction of travel. We're going to cover a lot of ground in 15 minutes, and I think we'll be picking up on a lot of the themes that Benjamin already introduced around disruption and how COVID is really an accelerator of a lot of the trends that we were seeing before the pandemic hit. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So I also write for Forbes, and last year, it's actually almost to the day, about a year ago, I put out a series of predictions because we were entering a new decade. A couple months later, global pandemic hit, which completely upended shopping habits and our everyday lives. So what is really interesting, though, is that a lot of these trends are actually still very valid. And if anything, they've only been accelerated. The one exception here is this idea of peak Amazon, because if anything, I think COVID will have delayed this idea of peak Amazon, and if anything, Amazon is proving to be the hands down undisputed winner from the pandemic, and plenty to say around that, but we'll move on for the sake of time. So before I get into retail, I want to talk a little bit about the consumer and how COVID has changed our habits, our expectations, our demands from retailers as consumers. We have to remember that we are 21st century shoppers, right? So we are used to having the world at our fingertips. We're used to shopping on our terms, not the terms dictated to us by the retailer. So when the pandemic hit, it was a pretty huge shock to the system. Everyday certainties dissolved. The ability to go to work, to send your kids to school, access to healthcare, access to groceries on shelves at the supermarket, access to toilet paper. So everything sort of just changed overnight, as we all know. And I won't spend too much time dwelling on the past, but I think the significance here is that this will have a lasting impact on consumer behavior and our mindset going forward. So I think that the pandemic has humbled us as consumers, and it's made us appreciate the most important things in life. And how does that translate into sort of what we want and expect from a retailer? There's two things for me. I think firstly, a very obvious point here is that we've learned to lead truly digital lives. So again, pre-COVID, our lives were very digitally influenced, but now our lives are overwhelmingly digital. So, we've learned to work online, homeschool online, exercise, socialize online, all kinds of things that we could have never dreamed of pre-COVID. And in the future, I think we won't really know where the physical world ends and the digital world begins. The other important thing from a consumer perspective, and then we'll move on to retail, is that the pandemic has really shown a light on the environmental impact of consumption, something we've always sort of known about. It's always been the elephant in the room. I think it's awakened many of us to the realities of climate change. And one of my Forbes predictions was that we would see a shift, again, this is pre-COVID, that we would see a shift away from mindless consumption towards more mindful consumption. And I really think this idea of conscious consumerism is about to burst into the mainstream, which will have huge implications on retail. I think there will be opportunities, just very briefly here, in the resale, repair, and rental economies, which are really the perfect antidote to fast fashion. Just Black Friday a couple weeks ago, we saw retailers like Pretty Little Thing offering dresses for 8p. And I think we're all recognizing that that just doesn't sit right with us, with many of us as consumers. So I think we can expect big changes in the future. So we have to point out here that the retail sector is no stranger to disruption. Retailers have had Amazon breathing down their necks for the past decade. Pre-COVID, Amazon was the primary catalyst for change. And so I think in many ways, retailers were actually well-equipped, unintentionally well-equipped to deal with a global pandemic because they've learned to be agile, they've learned to fail fast, they've learned to, we've seen a lot of these pandemic pivots, if you will. And so in some ways, they were well-positioned for when COVID hit. So something that I keep saying is that Amazon may have been the primary catalyst for change pre-COVID, but COVID will finish what Amazon started. I think this is so important. They say that necessity is the mother of change, and we've certainly seen that within retail. I think going forward, digital transformation is no longer optional. If anything, digital transformation is about to become supercharged. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the trends that we will see accelerated due to COVID. So very briefly here, it's very clear to see that COVID has accelerated the rise of e-commerce. We are spending a lot more time at home, and also when stores are physically forced to close, we have no choice but to shop online. So Benjamin alluded to the fact that I think it was around 20% of people tried shopping online for the first time. That behavior, I think, will stick. If we look at the data here, this is ONS retail sales data, online sales as a percentage of the total market. Up to, I should point out, this is up to October 2020. In a couple of weeks, we'll have November data, which will include the second lockdown. But as you can see, I've included my predictions from November onwards. Now, what's interesting here is that around a decade ago, e-commerce accounted for roughly 5 to 6% of the total market. Just before COVID, it got to 20%, which felt like a real milestone. And then in the space of 8 weeks, it jumped up to a third of total retail sales. Now, again, that's because we didn't have a choice as consumers. We had to shop online, and we were all sort of rushing to buy, toilet paper and hand sanitizer and whatnot. And I think that, that kind of erratic behavior has since leveled out. But the key point here is that consumers will have had a taste for online shopping, and I think that this will stick. At the same time, I do think we're desperate to get back into stores, and I'm going to come on to that in a little bit more detail later. But I really believe that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for e-commerce retailers to take things to the next level. However, I don't see e-commerce getting to sort of 50% of the market. I know some analysts are a little bit more bullish here. We also have to bear in mind that as e-commerce, as the market grows for online retail sales, so do the costs. That's something that we don't talk about probably enough. And I think we might see in the future things like, the reversal, not an easy thing to do, but the reversal of same day delivery. We've spent the past decade getting used to ever faster and free delivery. But I think there's an opportunity for retailers to retrain consumers to accept no rush delivery, which could be packaged as green delivery, for example. So I think that retailers are recognizing that this kind of growth really isn't sustainable. I mean, you only need to look at the messaging from retailers right now, right before Christmas, the most important time of the year for retail. Everyone is encouraging shoppers to collect from store, to shop early. They're trying to spread out that demand and encourage shoppers to shop online when there's no other choice, but also look to stores as a critical point, as a critical part of that fulfilling that e-commerce order. And something I keep saying is that the future of e-commerce, in my view, is actually stores. Stores really do play a critical role. So I think that COVID really is the ultimate e-commerce catalyst. If you look at what happened in China after SARS, we saw the sort of explosion of e-commerce there and digital payments, and that was something that really stuck. We saw Alibaba launch Taobao, we saw JD.com launch, all these huge e-commerce companies really began on the back of that epidemic. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens here in the UK, in a market where e-commerce is already very well established. A lot of people, especially in the more vulnerable category, will be wondering if stores are really worth it right now. And we'll come on to stores in a little bit more detail over the next few minutes. But we have increased connectivity. We've got 5G coming in. There will be no return to the old normal. We've already heard a little bit more about how, workplaces will be more blended in the future. And, we hear from big bosses saying it just doesn't make sense to have thousands of people grouped into a very expensive building in central London when actually we've all learned to work remotely. So I think just like the future of retail will very much be blended, I think that's certainly the future of work as well. Hyperlocal retail is going to boom. Again, this is something that was gathering momentum pre-COVID, but we're all spending more time than we probably ever imagined in our homes, and also we want to support our local communities who have been there for us during lockdown. So I think we will see sort of in tandem with the growth of e-commerce, the growth of hyperlocal retail is a real opportunity at last to really invest in our local high streets and reconfigure them to really take them into the 21st century. The second trend that I think we will see an acceleration in is the convergence of physical and digital retail. So there's two key things here for me. Firstly, whether intentional or not, we're seeing an acceleration in technology that facilitates a safe shopping environment. So contactless payments, for example, but perhaps what's more interesting is this idea of scan and go technology. So being able to, as Amazon says, just walk out. In the future, it won't feel like we're shoplifting to just pick something up off the shelf and walk out. Again, this was pre-COVID. This is retailers responding to the threat of Amazon and the pending launch of Amazon Go. It is coming to the UK at some point, and a lot of retailers were trying to get ahead of Amazon by investing in their own scan and go technology and checkout-free stores. M&S has just launched, I think it's just last month, they're rolling out scan and go technology to every single one of their UK stores. So this isn't just a fad. This is something that very much will stick post-COVID. The other really important point here is click and collect. Again, click and collect is nothing new for the UK high street. But what I found really interesting during the pandemic is that retailers that traditionally wouldn't embrace things like click and collect, independent retailers, Aldi, for example, is rolling out click and collect to a couple hundred stores. My local library, my local fish and chip shop, everyone is embracing this technology that enables customers to order online and collect in store. So again, with when you're forced to evolve, you certainly do. One other point around click and collect that I think will be really important for the future and how the high street evolves in the future is this idea of collaboration. So one example, Sweaty Betty teaming up with Waitrose to collect their, so shoppers can place an order online with Sweaty Betty and collect it in their local supermarket. Very important during lockdown when only essential retailers were allowed to stay open. So that's something we'll see much more of in the future as well. The digital world will become more immersive. So here's a rather embarrassing picture of me trying on lipstick virtually with Pinterest's new app. Social commerce is coming. It was coming pre-COVID. It's certainly coming now. We saw during lockdown, Facebook launched Facebook shops. I think the next decade, e-commerce experiences, the previous decade, e-commerce experiences were all about reducing friction and making it as easy and seamless as possible to order online and get stuff delivered to your house. The next decade will be about making it more enjoyable, more fun, more immersive, add more discovery and excitement. And that's where social media really comes into play. Also, the use of augmented and virtual reality, like Diesel, for example, and I think Balmain as well. There are a few other retailers trialing virtual showrooms. So you don't have to just type in little black dress and have 40,000 search results come up. You actually can feel as if you're walking into a store and trying stuff on. And very quickly, the last point I want to make here is that one thing that retailers had to do during lockdown that will stick again post-COVID is connecting online shoppers with in-store staff. I think retailers did a really brilliant job of making that connection. And there are other apps that were already out there pre-COVID, like Hero, for example, that were doing exactly that. It was more limited to the luxury end of the market. And again, this is something, this idea of this white glove service being democratized. I think this will really become mainstream, and we'll see this greater blurring between physical and digital worlds. We have to talk about the doom and gloom though, right? COVID will accelerate the demise of what I call mediocre retail. So we all know that there are a lot of retailers out there that have failed to adapt, that have failed to evolve. You only need to look to last week's news to see what's happening with Arcadia and Debenhams. This is, in my view, retail Darwinism on steroids. And now that in the current climate, there really are no second chances for retailers that fail to adapt. We were using the word unprecedented before COVID, talking about the level of change in the industry. And I think, COVID will, for some retailers, be the death knell. It will be the final nail in the coffin. The strong will emerge stronger. As I said, Amazon will be the big winner, but we have to recognize that we have to brace ourselves for more challenging times as the sector reconfigures for the digital age and simultaneously deals with a global pandemic. However, the positive stuff now, I think the future of retail in a nutshell is fewer but far better stores. So I think that there is an opportunity for retailers to redefine the physical space. And this slide is a presentation in itself. I mean, there's so much to say. But I heard Andrew Lloyd Webber talking on the Andrew Marr show last weekend. And what he said, talking about the return of live performances and the return of theater, really resonated for me as in terms of how shoppers will be coming back to stores. You know, he said that there's pent up demand and shoppers and theater goers will be coming back in droves as soon as they're able to. And I truly believe that's what we'll see in retail. You know, online shopping is great and we can expect to see continued growth, as I showed in that previous chart, but we are social creatures. We're all craving to get back to a sense of normality. Retailers have had to quite literally put the touch and feel of shopping on hold to keep us all safe. So, you know, going into a shop now where you've got to wear a mask and sanitize hands and you can't really try stuff on, it's not the same experience. And I think that it will come bouncing back. I think late 2021, realistically, is when we'll see a revival of the physical store. And retailers really need to start thinking about this now, about how they reconfigure and repurpose their stores. But I do believe that this century will have its own roaring 20s, if you will. And the physical store will be all about human touch, emotional connection, discovery, and community. And I think that high touch, sensory driven experience will come bouncing back into physical stores. So that's the something to look forward to, I think, late next year. We'll just wrap it up with this final slide, which is the most important word in retail at the moment: agility. I think there's three key traits for retailers that are looking to survive and thrive on the back of this crisis. Agility goes without saying. You know, there will be no return to the status quo, and you know, now more than ever, retailers really have to evolve. Resilience is the second word for me. You know, we do have to brace ourselves for more challenging times ahead. But purpose is the third word. And I think this is really important because, you know, our values as consumers have changed dramatically in the past year. And I think that, you know, consumers will be looking to align themselves with brands whose values reflect their own. I think that's going to become increasingly important in the future. But in summary, you know, opportunities will emerge from this crisis. And I think now more than ever, it's essential that retailers embrace change. So that's my whirlwind tour of retail. I'm conscious we've covered a lot of ground and always happy to answer any questions in a follow-up. Thank you.